Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin.
Have you ever found yourself just incredibly successful at a job or a role, or even just a really specific task that you secretly, fundamentally despise?
Oh, I think a lot of people are going to nod their heads at that one.
Right. And you are stuck doing it simply because you happen to be undeniably, unignorably good at it. I mean, I want you to genuinely examine that for a second.
It's a really uncomfortable thing to look at.
It really is.
Yeah.
Picture that complex financial model you can build and balance in your sleep. Or that highly volatile client meeting you are constantly asked to step into because you possess this, unique knack for rapid de-escalation.
Or even outside of work. It happens at home all the time.
Exactly. Maybe it's deeply embedded in your personal life. You happen to be the ultimate hyper-competent logistics coordinator, so you end up planning every single family reunion.
Every vacation, every group dinner.
Yeah, even though the sheer volume of scheduling gives you a tension headache that lasts for days. You execute the task flawlessly, and the people around you are thrilled.
They love it. They don't have to do it.
Right. You get praised, you get promoted, you get a pat on the back, and inside, this quiet but persistent voice is screaming, "Please, whatever you do, never make me do this again."
It's a completely paradoxical experience, really.
It is. I mean, we are conditioned from our earliest memories to believe that being highly capable at something is the ultimate goal. We view competence as the finish line.
But what happens when crossing that finish line actually locks you into a grueling, never-ending race you never actually wanted to run in the first place?
That is exactly where we are getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. The scenario you just helped me describe touches on one of the most pervasive yet consistently overlooked sources of modern existential dread.
It really is. We operate within this deeply ingrained cultural framework that equates ability with affinity.
Right, like if you're good at it, you must love it.
Exactly. If you demonstrate the capacity to execute a complex task efficiently, the immediate societal assumption is that you must derive personal fulfillment from it.
And if you don't?
Well, if you don't, the assumption is that your personal fulfillment is secondary to the fact that you are providing immense value to the ecosystem you belong to.
Which is pretty harsh when you think about it.
It is, but we rarely pause to ask, value to whom? When you become an incredibly efficient engine powering someone else's vehicle.
Wait, I love that framing.
Thanks. Yeah. Whether that vehicle is a corporation, a social group, or a familial structure, your utility just overshadows your humanity.
Wow. Your utility overshadows your humanity.
And the profound tragedy of this dynamic is that the better the engine runs, the smoother it operates, the less likely anyone in the vehicle is to ever look under the hood and ask if the engine itself is actually heading in the direction it wants to go.
An efficient engine powering someone else's vehicle, that perfectly captures the friction we're going to explore today. We have a profoundly fascinating piece of text serving as the foundation for this deep dive.
It's a really dense, highly analytical excerpt.
It is. It constructs a very specific conceptual framework titled The Tyranny of Competence, the heavy burden of doing things just because you're good at them.
Such a powerful title.
Right. So our mission today is to thoroughly dissect this trap of effortless talent. We are going to examine why the simple fact that you can do something does not obligate you to build your entire existence around it.
Which is a lot harder to untangle than it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. And perhaps most crucially, we are going to navigate the deeply uncomfortable, highly disruptive process of figuring out what you actually want to do when your entire identity has been buried underneath layers of praise and hypercapability.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the specific language used in that title, the tyranny of competence. That is a deliberately aggressive linguistic choice.
It definitely isn't sugarcoating anything.
No, not at all. A tyrant is not merely a difficult manager or a frustrating set of circumstances. A tyrant is an absolute ruler who dictates terms through the suppression of individual will.
And the linguistic severity is entirely the point. The authors of the source text are actively pushing back against the normalization of this phenomenon.
They don't just call it an inconvenience.
Right. They do not refer to it as the inconvenience of talent or the annoyance of being relied upon. They classify it as a tyranny because, well, When we examine the underlying psychological mechanics, an innate skill or highly developed ability can literally usurp your autonomy.
Usurp your autonomy.
Yeah.
So it basically takes over.
Exactly. Consider the defining characteristics of a tyrannical regime. It dictates your physical movements, it appropriates your resources for its own sustenance, and it systematically eliminates your right to chart an independent course.
That sounds terrifyingly similar to a bad corporate job.
It really does. When a specific competence reaches this tyrannical threshold in your life, it operates through the exact same mechanisms. It generates a localized reality where you believe you have a mandate to perform.
A mandate to perform. Because everyone expects it of you.
Precisely. The environment around you, your educational institutions, your professional network, your peer group, they act as the unwitting enforcers of this regime.
They're acting like the tyrant's guards.
Right. The moment they identify your high capacity for a specific output, they structure their interactions with you to continuously funnel you toward that exact output.
I want to visualize this because the feeling of being funneled is so visceral when you are actually trapped in it.
Visceral is the perfect word for it.
It feels a bit like being the only person in a sinking lifeboat who actually knows the proper technique for rowing.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
You never asked to be the rower. In fact, you might absolutely loathe rowing. It blisters your hands and physically depletes you, and you are forced to stare down at the stagnant water in the bottom of the boat while every other passenger gets to look out at the horizon.
And they're probably enjoying the view.
Exactly. But because you are the sole individual possessing the competence required to keep the vessel moving forward, you are essentially locked into that seat.
Because if you drop the oars, the boat capsizes.
Right. The people around you are clapping, they are cheering you on, they're constantly telling you how remarkably strong and essential you are. But the praise doesn't change the physical reality of the situation. You are a prisoner to the oar.
That analogy really illuminates a critical component of the trap, which is the role of external validation as a binding agent.
The cheering makes it harder to stop.
It does. The cheering passengers in your lifeboat make the imprisonment feel not just necessary, but morally mandated. You are held captive not by malice, but by the sheer gravitational pull of your own utility.
Because if you stop, you feel like you're letting everyone down.
Exactly. When you attempt to contextualize the desire to drop those oars, you are immediately confronted by an immense wave of guilt.
Guilt is such a huge factor here.
It is. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and our evolutionary psychology dictates that if we possess a capability that ensures the survival or prosperity of the group, withholding that capability is viewed as a fundamental breach of the social contract.
So you begin to conflate your moral worth with your continuous output.
Yes, you start thinking, if I'm not doing this thing I'm good at, I'm a bad person.
I'm glad you brought up the moral weight of this, because I want to pause and push back on this entire premise on behalf of the listener.
Please do. It's a controversial take.
I can easily imagine someone listening to this right now who is actively fighting just to get their foot in the door of their chosen industry. To that person, isn't competence fundamentally a massive, undeniable privilege?
That is a very valid perspective.
We're sitting here labeling it a tyranny, but there are countless people dealing with systemic friction every single day just to be deemed competent enough to earn a living wage.
It's true. Access is not evenly distributed.
Right. There are people lacking access to the educational pipelines that forge these high-level skills, or people who simply do not possess an innate aptitude that the current market values.
So complaining about being too good at something sounds a bit tone-deaf to them.
Exactly. If you are grinding away in a chaotic job market, hearing someone lament the profound burden of being too good at a highly compensated executive function or a specialized technical role sounds incredibly out of touch.
It sounds like a luxury problem.
Why should we frame this as a tyrannical burden when it looks identical to the leverage that millions of people are desperate to attain?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your pushback highlights a really necessary distinction between economic survival and psychological self-actualization.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, acknowledging the tyranny of competence does not negate the reality of privilege. In fact, it requires an understanding of it. Possessing a highly valued competence, particularly one that shields you from financial instability, is undeniably an advantageous position in a capitalist framework.
So the authors aren't denying the financial benefits.
Not at all. The tyranny we are analyzing is not an indictment of the skill itself, nor is it a denial of the material comfort that skill can provide. The suffering stems specifically from the hollowing out of agency.
The hollowing out of agency.
Yes, the human experience is vast enough to accommodate multiple concurrent forms of suffering. The individual struggling to secure entry-level employment is enduring a crisis of access and material security.
Which is incredibly stressful.
Highly stressful. But the individual trapped by their own effortless competence is enduring a crisis of identity and autonomy.
Okay. Different kind of cage.
Exactly. A gilded cage is entirely distinct from a rusted cage, and the accommodations are vastly superior. But the defining characteristic of both structures is that the door is locked from the outside.
That is a fantastic way to put it. The peril of the competence trap is that it overrides intentionality.
It completely overrides it.
I see the distinction now. You are surviving, and by all external quantifiable metrics, you are thriving. But you are entirely disconnected from the steering wheel. Your life is happening to you, driven by the momentum of your own talent.
Precisely. When intentionality is compromised over a long enough timeline, you can arrive at a destination of high societal status while experiencing profound internal desolation.
Internal desolation, that's heavy.
It is heavy. The human psyche does not merely require sustenance. It requires the belief that we have a meaningful hand in authoring our own narrative.
If we don't feel like we're writing the story, we feel lost.
Right. If your professional and personal trajectory is nothing more than a series of reflexive reactions to your own capability, you experience a creeping alienation from your core self.
You stop being a person making choices and start being a highly optimized tool being wielded by market forces.
Exactly. And the psychological weight of spending 40, 50, or 60 hours a week executing complex tasks that you feel fundamentally disconnected from.
Just because your error rate is 0.
Yes. Doing that simply because your error rate is 0 creates a cognitive dissonance that is remarkably difficult to survive without numbing yourself.
That concept of a crisis of identity transitions us perfectly into examining the specific mechanics of how this trap is actually built.
Because it doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't. The source text has a subtitle that caught my attention immediately. The heavy burden of doing things just because you're good at them.
The heavy burden.
I really want to dissect the concept of effortless talent because culturally, we fetishize the effortless.
We absolutely do. The genius myth.
Right. We romanticize the image of the prodigy. We love the idea of the brilliant mathematician who solves the theorem on a napkin in a bar, or the writer who just bleeds genius onto the page without editing.
Which is almost never the reality, by the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens when we strip away the romanticism? How does an effortless talent functionally operate in the day-to-day life of a normal person? And what are the mechanics that turn that lack of effort into a trap?
To understand the mechanics of the trap, we have to look closely at the role of friction in human development.
Friction, okay.
Under normal circumstances, learning and growth are heavily predicated on encountering resistance. You attempt to acquire a new skill, you immediately run into a barrier, a point of friction, and that friction acts as a biological and psychological stop sign.
It forces you to pause.
It forces a mandatory pause. In that pause, your brain has to run a cost-benefit analysis. Is overcoming this specific obstacle worth the required expenditure of energy?
Like, do I actually want this enough to keep trying?
Exactly. Do I possess a deep enough intrinsic desire to push through this acute discomfort? Friction is the mechanism that forces self-reflection. It is the fire that tests the integrity of your internal compass.
It's the equivalent of taking up a highly technical physical hobby, like rock climbing.
Perfect example.
The first time you get on a wall, your forearms are screaming, your grip strength fails, and you fall. The physical pain is the friction.
It's immediate feedback.
Right. It immediately asks you a very blunt question. Do you actually want to be a rock climber, or did you just think the gear looked cool?
You have to genuinely want the outcome to endure the torn calluses.
Exactly. With torn calluses, force you to verify your intentionality. But when you possess an effortless talent, you are entirely deprived of that vital friction.
You never get the stop sign.
Yes. When a cognitive or physical task aligns perfectly with your innate wiring, you glide right past the early stages of development.
Whether you are navigating a university degree program, a corporate training period, or a complex social dynamic, you just don't encounter the barriers that force critical self-evaluation.
You simply absorb the material and output the correct results.
Right. You ace the exam without opening the textbook. You resolve the structural engineering problem while daydreaming. You seamlessly manage the conflicting personalities in the boardroom without your heart rate ever elevating.
And because the execution is frictionless, you are never forced to stop and ask yourself the foundational question: do I actually care about what I am doing?
You are robbed of the necessary obstacles that forge genuine, durable desire.
That is an incredibly dangerous blind spot. You are essentially sliding down a mountain simply because it represents the path of least resistance.
Gaining more and more speed.
Yeah, without ever checking a topographical map to see if you actually want to end up in the valley at the bottom.
And because you're moving so fast and looking so graceful doing it, everyone around you assumes you know exactly where you are going.
Which leads us to the neurochemistry of this trap. Because I don't think we can talk about effortless talent without talking about why it feels so impossible to stop. We aren't just doing this in a vacuum. We are being heavily rewarded for it.
The reward mechanisms are the architectural foundation of the tyranny.
It's all about dopamine, right?
It is. When you execute a task effortlessly and achieve a flawless result, your environment responds. Your supervisors, your clients, your family, they do not see the lack of internal effort. They only perceive the high quality of the output.
They just see the shiny result.
Right. And in response, they provide positive reinforcement. This praise, this sudden elevation in social standing, triggers a massive release of dopamine within the brain's reward pathways.
And dopamine is highly addictive.
It is. But dopamine is not just the feel-good neurotransmitter. It is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, learning, and reinforcing behaviors that secure our position within a hierarchy.
Oh, wow. So it's tied to survival.
Exactly. When you receive that hit of external validation for a task that costs you very little energy, your brain logs it as a highly efficient survival strategy.
So on a biological level, our brains are basically screaming, whatever you just did, do it again. It's cheap, it's easy, and the tribe loves us for it.
You become neurologically addicted to the applause generated by your own utility.
That is wild. That is a highly accurate assessment of the neurochemical loop. You do the thing, you get the dopamine hit of social approval, and because you established a high baseline so effortlessly, the volume and complexity of the expectations immediately increase.
The environment realizes you have excess capacity.
So the reward for doing excellent, effortless work is inevitably more work.
Always. You are given the harder projects, the more demanding client, the more fragile social situations to manage.
And you keep succeeding, and the dopamine keeps hitting, but the sheer volume of the obligation begins to compound.
It gets heavier and heavier.
Right. That light, airy talent you displayed in your 20s slowly crystallizes into a dense, inescapable burden by your 30s. It becomes a load-bearing pillar in the structure of your life.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because everything we are discussing directly contradicts the fundamental gospel of the modern workplace and the multi-billion-dollar self-help industry.
Oh, totally. The whole find your strength thing.
Right. From the time we enter the educational system, we are fed a steady diet of personality tests and aptitude assessments. The entire philosophy, driven by movements like the StrengthsFinder phenomenon, screams at us to identify our strengths.
Double down on your strengths. Outsource your weaknesses and lean entirely into what you are naturally wired to do.
Standard management theory operates on the assumption that aligning a worker with their highest competence is the absolute zenith of organizational optimization.
We are conditioned to view our greatest strength as our guaranteed ticket to both success and happiness.
But the source text is arguing the exact opposite. It's suggesting that your greatest strength might actually be a trapdoor disguised as a pedestal.
A trapdoor disguised as a pedestal. I love that imagery. But wait, is the maximize your strengths philosophy really that bad?
It's not inherently malicious, but it is dangerously incomplete and often weaponized by systems that prioritize productivity over human flourishing.
So it's used to squeeze more out of people.
Exactly. The fatal flaw in that paradigm is the assumption of a universal, unbreakable correlation between competence and fulfillment. It treats human beings as linear equations, ignoring the reality that we are deeply complex, highly contradictory entities.
We aren't just math problems to be solved.
Right. It is entirely possible and incredibly common to possess a genius-level aptitude for a discipline that utterly bores you to tears. When we build entire educational and corporate structures around blindly advising individuals to follow the path of their highest competence, we are routinely marching them straight onto that trapdoor. We are actively instructing them to prioritize their utility to the market over their own internal humanity.
Utility over humanity. When you frame it like that, you start to see why this generates such a specific, devastating kind of burnout.
It's a very unique type of exhaustion.
I've read quite a bit about burnout literature, specifically looking at how we often miscategorize it. We usually think of burnout as the coal miner or the emergency room triage nurse, a state of absolute physical depletion and emotional exhaustion from sheer overexertion.
Right, the classic definition.
But the people caught in the tyranny of competence are often experiencing something different. They're experiencing what some organizational psychologists call bore-out or existential burnout.
It's a burnout born entirely of misalignment.
The distinction between depletion burnout and misalignment burnout is crucial, isn't it?
It is. When you suffer from misalignment burnout, your physical stamina might be perfectly fine, and your hours might even be reasonable.
You might even be working from home in your pajamas.
Exactly. The exhaustion stems from the massive cognitive and emotional load required to continuously maintain a facade. You are spending 40 hours a week performing high-level competence, while internally, your authentic self is entirely disengaged, perhaps even actively rebelling against the work.
Like your brain is trying to reject the organ.
That's a great way to put it. This creates profound cognitive dissonance. The external world is constantly providing data that says you are succeeding, you are wealthy, you are respected. But your internal emotional landscape is a barren wasteland.
So you have to split yourself in two.
You are forced to split your identity in two. The highly capable avatar that goes to work and the hollowed-out individual who commutes home.
And the isolation of that experience must be staggering. Because if you try to articulate this misery to a colleague, you sound insane.
Oh, completely.
You try to tell a coworker that you're exhausted, and they look at you and say, "What are you talking about? You just closed a massive merger in 3 hours without breaking a sweat, and it took me 3 weeks just to draft the preliminary paperwork."
They'd probably be resentful.
Exactly. You can't vent to your peers because they are actively struggling to achieve the baseline that you find trivial. You can't vent to your family because your competence is funding their lifestyle, and they are proud of your prestige. So you swallow the dissonance. You internalize the misery.
And the guilt isolates you completely. You begin to view yourself as ungrateful or fraudulent.
Because it's easy for you.
Right. The work is cognitively easy, but the active suppression of your true desires, the continuous silencing of that inner voice that wants something different, requires an astronomical amount of emotional energy.
It's a silent, invisible exhaustion.
It is a silent, invisible exhaustion that doesn't show up on a performance review, but it slowly corrodes your psychological structural integrity.
Which brings us to the macro-level consequences. Because this corrosion doesn't just ruin a few hours of your Tuesday afternoon. The source text expands this concept from a micro-frustration into a much more terrifying existential reality.
This is where it gets really serious.
The text states, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should build a life around it. We are moving from the trap of doing a task to the trap of inhabiting an identity.
What's fascinating here is this represents the critical transition point from micro-actions to macro-architecture.
Right, from doing a thing to being the thing.
Exactly. When we examine how lives are actually constructed, they are rarely the result of a single sweeping cinematic decision. Identity and lifestyle are built incrementally, brick by brick, through a relentless series of default yeses to tasks that present no friction.
It is the inertia of unchecked competence.
Inertia is the key word.
Let's trace that inertia. How does a simple lack of friction build an entire life you don't want?
It begins early. You say yes to joining the debate team in high school, not because you are passionate about public policy, but because you naturally possess a sharp memory and a talent for rapid verbal synthesis.
It was just easy to say yes.
Right. You say yes to the pre-law track in college because the debate coach told you it was the logical next step, and the coursework comes easily to you. You say yes to the high-pressure corporate litigation firm because they recruited you heavily based on your class rank.
And you just keep going.
You say yes to the partner track because you win cases flawlessly. Suddenly, 15 years have evaporated.
Wow.
You have not made a single deeply intentional, desire-based choice about your soul's calling since you were a teenager. You merely allowed the gravitational pull of your own skill to dictate your trajectory.
That is terrifying.
And then, usually in your mid-30s or early 40s, the danger fully manifests. You wake up, look around, and realize you are standing inside a massive, heavily fortified, incredibly lucrative fortress.
And that fortress is constructed entirely out of your effortless talents. But it's a fortress you never actually wanted to live in. It's a life built on a foundation of apathy. I want to use an analogy here because the architecture of this trap reminds me of something very specific from the tech world rather than physical buildings.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about a medium-sized company that is running its entire operation on a deeply flawed, outdated legacy software system from the late 1990s.
Oh, I know those systems well.
Right. The software is clunky, it crashes constantly, and it is holding the company back from modernizing. But there is one IT guy, let's call him the hyper-competent employee.
The one guy who knows how it works.
Exactly. He is the only person who intuitively understands the spaghetti code of this ancient system. He can patch the bugs in his sleep. He can keep the servers running when everything should technically be on fire.
That is an incredibly apt framework for understanding organizational dynamics. What happens to the IT professional in this scenario?
He becomes completely trapped by his own utility. He actually hates the software. He wants to work on modern machine learning models or sleek app development.
But they won't let him.
No. Because he is so miraculously good at keeping the terrible legacy system alive, the company refuses to spend the millions of dollars required to upgrade. Instead, they just keep paying the IT guy more and more money.
Golden handcuffs.
They give him a corner office, they give him stock options, but he can never take a vacation because if the system goes down, he is the only one who can fix it.
He is a hostage.
He is simultaneously the savior of the company and a total hostage to his own bizarrely specific competence. He built a highly lucrative career around a system he despises, and now he is the structural load-bearing pillar of the entire enterprise.
What is fascinating about your legacy software analogy is how perfectly it illustrates the behavioral economics principle of the sunk cost fallacy applied to human identity.
The sunk cost fallacy. Explain that in this context.
Well, the sunk cost fallacy is a cognitive bias that compels us to continue a behavior, an endeavor, or a trajectory simply as a result of previously invested resources, whether that is time, money, or emotional effort.
Right, like staying in a bad movie because you already bought the ticket.
Exactly. When we apply this to the tyranny of competence, the stakes are existential. Once a life is built around a specific utility, dismantling it feels both psychologically and practically catastrophic.
Because it's not just a movie ticket, it's your whole life.
The IT professional looks at his corner office, his impressive salary, the lifestyle his family has grown accustomed to, and the profound respect he commands within the building. The idea of walking away from all of that to become an entry-level developer in a totally different coding language feels entirely irrational to the brain's risk assessment center.
His competence is no longer just a skill he deploys. It is the load-bearing weight of his entire reality.
If he pulls out the pillar of his competence, the roof of his life comes crashing down.
The stakes become incredibly high. We aren't just talking about the discomfort of, I don't really feel like formatting this spreadsheet today. We are talking about the terror of, if I refuse to format this spreadsheet, I lose my professional identity, my peer group, and my ability to pay my mortgage.
It's paralyzing.
Which brings up a massive, highly practical question for anyone listening who might be realizing that they are currently the IT guy keeping a legacy system alive in their own life. At what exact point does leveraging a skill to get ahead cross the line into accidentally building a prison around yourself?
It's a blurry line.
How do you spot the transition before the concrete pours and sets? Because let's be realistic. Early in your career, in your 20s, you have to leverage whatever skills you have just to survive.
Of course you do.
You have to use your natural aptitudes to get a foothold in the economy. So when does survival pivot into tyranny?
Identifying that transition point is notoriously difficult, primarily because the warning signs are almost entirely internal, while the external dashboard is flashing green.
Right. Everyone thinks you're doing great.
The market is giving you raises, your network is expanding, your title is improving, but internally the transition from leverage to tyranny is marked by a subtle, insidious shift in your emotional baseline.
What does that shift feel like?
It rarely begins with a dramatic breakdown. It usually begins with a persistent, low-grade frequency of dread. I'm not talking about the acute stress of a challenging project or a looming deadline. I'm talking about a dull, humming dread regarding the fundamental nature of the work itself.
Like the Sunday scaries, but deeper.
Yes. You might experience the classic Sunday scaries, but upon reflection, you realize you aren't anxious about the workload. You resent the very premise of the tasks you are returning to.
I've heard people describe it as the feeling of constantly impersonating yourself. You are putting on a highly convincing costume to go execute your competence.
The sensation of impersonation is a massive red flag. When you feel like an actor playing the role of a hyper-competent professional, the concrete of the trap is beginning to set.
You're just reading lines from a script.
Right. You start noticing that the external rewards, the bonus check, the public praise no longer generate genuine satisfaction. They simply feel like hazard pay for your emotional labor.
Hazard pay. Wow. So what do you do when you realize that?
To spot this transition before it locks you in permanently, you have to initiate a radical, often terrifying shift in your perspective. You have to actively force yourself to stop evaluating what you can do or what the market wants you to do, and you must begin confronting the terrifying void of what you actually want to do.
The terrifying void. I want to linger on that phrase because it hits the nail on the head. If you strip away the armor of being the person who is incredibly good at X, a lot of high achievers have absolutely no idea who or what is left underneath.
They draw a complete blank.
And that brings us to the final and frankly the most destabilizing part of this entire deep dive, escaping the trap. The source text explicitly pushes us toward this necessity. It demands that we do the work of finding out what you actually want to do.
Which is easier said than done.
Way easier said than done. But if you have been living under the tyranny of competence for a decade or more, how do you even begin to approach that question?
This raises an important question, and it is arguably the hardest question you can ask. Because for someone suffering from this specific tyranny, their internal navigational equipment has been fundamentally compromised.
It's broken.
Well, imagine holding a compass, but someone has securely taped a powerful neodymium magnet to the outside of the casing. The needle is always going to snap to the magnet. It is physically incapable of pointing to true north.
Oh, that's such a good visual.
For the hyper-competent individual, that external magnet is praise, frictionless victories, and social approval. They have navigated their entire adult life by following the immediate dopamine hit of being told, "You are brilliant at this."
So they don't even know what their true north is.
Exactly. After years of operating under that magnetic field, they literally lose the capacity to hear the quieter, subtler, often confusing voice of their own intrinsic desires. The needle is stuck.
So the process of discovering what you actually want isn't about simply adding a new hobby to your calendar. It's an act of subtraction.
It is entirely an act of subtraction.
It's about violently removing the magnet. It's about deliberately stripping away the ego boost of being good at something.
Yes. And this forces a confrontation with the ego. How do you practically separate your true intrinsic desires from the extrinsic reward of being praised?
It sounds incredibly painful.
The answer is profoundly uncomfortable, particularly for high achievers. It requires a radical willingness to actively embrace incompetence.
Embracing incompetence.
What?
You are telling people who have built their entire self-worth on being flawless to intentionally be bad at something.
Yes, I am.
That sounds like absolute kryptonite to the kind of person we've been describing.
It is absolute kryptonite to the ego.
Yeah.
But it is the only known cure for the soul in this specific predicament.
Okay, I'm listening.
If you restrict your life exclusively to the domains where you are already highly competent, you are effectively trapping yourself in the past. You are living off the fumes of skills you acquired years ago.
Because there's no new growth.
Right. To discover the future, to unearth what you genuinely, intrinsically enjoy, you have to be willing to revert to the status of a beginner. You have to be willing to endure the friction.
You have to struggle.
You have to struggle, you have to look foolish, your processing speed has to drop, and you have to be undeniably, visibly bad at something.
Let's ground this in reality. Give me a concrete example of how choosing to be bad at something functionally helps you locate your true north.
Let's move away from the corporate space for a moment. Imagine an incredibly successful surgeon.
Okay, surgeon.
Her entire life is precision, high stakes, and immense social reverence. Her competence is undeniable, but she's experiencing that profound, hollow dread we discussed.
She's burning out on misalignment.
Exactly. To break the magnetism, she decides to take up woodworking, specifically traditional hand tool woodworking.
Complete left turn.
She has no background in it. For the first 6 months, she spends hours in a dusty garage. Her saws bind in the wood, her chisels slip, and the first piece of furniture she manages to assemble is a severely lopsided, profoundly ugly chair.
And nobody is clapping for that chair.
There is no applause. There is
Okay.
no external validation. Her colleagues aren't impressed. They probably think it's a waste of her valuable time. Nobody is paying her for this output. It is pure, unadulterated friction.
So why do it?
Because if, despite the lack of praise, despite the physical frustration and the terrible end product, she still finds herself eagerly anticipating the smell of the sawdust, the quiet focus of sharpening a blade, and the physical challenge of cutting a dovetail joint, then she has discovered an intrinsic desire. She has discovered that she genuinely loves the process of the activity, entirely divorced from the reward of succeeding at it.
I love that. That is the ultimate litmus test. Okay. If you completely eliminate the applause, if you remove the audience and the paycheck, do you still want to play the song?
Exactly.
If the answer is yes, you have successfully located true north. If the answer is no, you were never in love with the music. You were just addicted to the applause.
Precisely. The tyranny of competence thrives almost exclusively on the addiction to external applause. Breaking the tyranny requires imposing a strict dopamine fast from that specific type of validation.
You have to detox from being good.
You have to systematically relearn how to generate satisfaction internally, driven by curiosity, engagement, and play, rather than efficiency, optimization, and output.
Okay, conceptually, I am entirely on board. The dusty garage, the ugly chair, the quiet focus, finding your soul's true desire, it is a beautiful, deeply resonant philosophy. But I have to bring us back down to earth and play devil's advocate for the listener who is commuting right now. Let's be brutally realistic.
Let's do it.
What if what you actually want to do, the thing that brings you intrinsic joy, does not pay the bills? What if building lopsided chairs doesn't cover a mortgage or health insurance or a kid's college tuition?
That is the reality for most people.
Right. If your effortless talent, the exact thing you resent but are miraculously good at, is the economic engine that keeps a roof over your family's head, is it responsible or even possible to simply abandon it? We can't all just dramatically quit our high-paying jobs, walk into the woods, and become terrible woodworkers.
That is the most vital, grounded, and necessary question we can ask. This is exactly where highly theoretical, philosophical discussions about following your passion often collapse into toxic positivity if they aren't handled with extreme care.
It can sound so privileged, right? Just quit your job and paint.
Exactly. The reality of economic obligation cannot be ignored. And the answer is no. Escaping the trap does not necessarily require you to burn your current life to the ground. The objective is not the complete eradication of your competence. The objective is to formally demote it.
Demote it. That is a fascinating framework. You don't fire your competence, you just strip it of its executive power. Tell me how that works in practice.
You must forcibly demote your competence from a tyrant that rules your entire identity and self-worth to a mere tool that you wield for a highly specific, restricted purpose.
Tyrant to tool.
Let's revisit the analogies. A tyrant dictates your inherent value as a human being. It demands your off hours, it drains your emotional energy, and it demands total, unwavering focus.
And a tool.
A tool, on the other hand, sits quietly in a toolbox until you specifically require it to perform a function. And the moment the function is complete, you put the tool away.
Like a heavy-duty wrench. You don't take the wrench to bed with you. You don't derive your spiritual meaning from the wrench. And you certainly don't define your soul by how well you turn it.
That's a perfect visual.
You just use it to fix the plumbing so your house has running water, and then you drop it back in the metal box.
Exactly. You can utilize your competence, your innate ability to dissect financial models, to write complex code, to manage chaotic logistics, as a highly effective tool to fund the life you actually want to live.
So you still do the job.
You commute to the office, you execute your competence with professional efficiency, you generate value, and you collect the paycheck. But the critical life-saving shift is the psychological boundary you construct around it.
You compartmentalize it.
You must fiercely, aggressively protect your core identity from being consumed by the tool. You stop looking to your professional competence to provide your life with existential meaning.
You stop caring if the boss thinks you're a visionary.
You stop volunteering for the extra committees just to get another hit of praise. You stop staying late to optimize a process that is already good enough.
You just do the job.
You execute the job, you clock out, and you deliberately invest the massive reserves of energy you just saved into the domains where you are a passionate, struggling, joyful beginner.
You essentially build a massive psychological firewall between your utility and your humanity.
A firewall is exactly what it is.
You allow your competence to pay the mortgage on the giant Victorian house you accidentally built, but you stop decorating the rooms. Instead, you go out into the backyard and you start building a secret, mid-century modern studio out of scrap wood.
And that studio is where you actually live.
And that studio is where you actually spend your emotional time. You allow the job to be just a job.
Yes. And the beauty of this approach is that over a longer timeline, as you nurture those intrinsic desires behind the firewall, you might discover avenues for a slow, calculated pivot.
So it could turn into a career eventually.
You might eventually find a way to monetize the passion without ruining it. Or, equally valid, you might realize that having a predictable, easy, somewhat boring day job that effortlessly funds a vibrant, intensely passionate personal life is actually a magnificent balance.
That sounds like a pretty great life, honestly.
The ultimate victory over the tyranny of competence is not necessarily monetizing your joy. The ultimate victory is the reclamation of your agency.
Taking back the steering wheel.
It is making the conscious, deliberate choice about how and why you are deploying your skills, rather than allowing the skills to blindly drag you through the decades.
Okay, let's unpack this entire incredible journey we've been on today. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? Driving in your car or walking the dog or sitting at the very desk you've been anchored to by your own undeniable success.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. We started by examining the jarring paradox of being wildly successful at something you secretly despise. We explored how the tyranny of confidence strips away our agency, creating a powerful illusion of destiny where society constantly funnels us toward our highest utility.
We talked about the danger of frictionless paths.
Right. We broke down the mechanics of effortless talent, how the total absence of friction prevents us from asking if we actually care about the path we are on. We discussed the neurochemistry of the trap, how dopamine loops and external validation addict us to the applause of our peers,
leading to that very specific, isolating form of existential bore-out.
Exactly. We looked at the macro-level dangers through the lens of the sunk cost fallacy, visualizing the IT guy trapped by the legacy system he alone can fix.
And we plotted an escape route.
Yes. Crucially, we mapped out an escape route that respects the reality of economic obligations. We recognize that breaking the tyranny doesn't require burning down everything you have built.
It just requires silencing the applause.
It requires the brave, deeply uncomfortable work of silencing the external applause so you can recalibrate your internal compass. It means actively embracing the friction of being a beginner, enduring the awkwardness of incompetence to locate your true desires.
Building that psychological firewall.
And most importantly, it means building a psychological firewall, demoting your effortless talent from a tyrant that dictates your identity to a mere tool that funds your actual life. You must decouple what you're capable of doing from who you are meant to be. Competence is an incredibly useful tool, but it is a uniquely terrible master.
A uniquely terrible master. I absolutely love that framing.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave the listener with something to really chew on as they transition back into their day.
I have a final diagnostic thought for you, the listener, to deeply ponder as you go back to your routines. I want you to identify the one thing in your life right now that everyone consistently praises you for.
That thing that's just so easy for you.
Exactly. The specific task, the professional role, the emotional capability that comes completely naturally to you, the thing people constantly refer to as your superpower. I want you to visualize it clearly in your mind.
Got it.
Now, ask yourself this highly disruptive question. If all the external praise stopped completely tomorrow, if no one ever complimented you on it again, if the title was stripped away, and if every single ounce of financial reward vanished, would you ever choose to do it again purely for yourself?
Oh, wow.
And if the honest, quiet answer in the back of your mind is no, what does that tell you about who or what is actually running your life?
That is a heavyweight question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the complex paradox of talent, the trap of the frictionless path, and the heavy burden of being just a little too good at the wrong things. We hope this conversation provides you with the framework and perhaps the permission you might have been quietly waiting for to start questioning your own default settings. We challenge you to embrace a little bit of strategic incompetence this week and to start actively looking for the kind of friction that actually matters to you. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and maybe, just for today, try letting someone else row the boat. Come on.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.